So our next speaker is Eileen Godard. And Eileen Godard is a religious studies student at PhD student, that is, at the University of California, Santa Barbara. She completed her master's degree in religion at Rutgers University and her BA in philosophy at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Eileen is also the program director of the Winter Hinduism in India Study Abroad program at Rutgers University that takes place in India. Everybody, please welcome Eileen Godard.
Great. Thank you so much. So thank you very much for having me today. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to present this paper, which connects to my dissertation, to my broader dissertation research that centers around the 16th century Gaudiya Vaishnava Krishna Bhakti tradition. So I'm particularly interested in the variant ways in which raga, or desire, is specifically utilized as a transformative component within Bhakti, Tantric, and ascetic traditions. And this paper gives me such a wonderful opportunity to begin exploring this within the Jain context. So with that said, this paper explores the paradoxical rejection and embrace of different typologies of desire, or raga, in Jain traditions. So Jain traditions broadly categorize some forms of raga as cognitive obstructions that are incompatible with liberation, and other forms of raga, I argue, as contemplative or yogic auxiliaries to liberation. So today I analyze such juxtaposition of different typologies of raga through consideration of the 6 avashikas, the daily obligations of Jain ascetics. So avashika literature dates to the pre-sectarian period, and the 6 avashikas are therefore both present in and often quite similarly described in both Shvetambara and Digambara sources. Discussion of the 6 avashikas takes place, for instance, in the Shvetambara Avashika Sutra, as well as in the Digambara Mulachara of Vatakera, and in Kunda Kunda's Niyamasada, etc. So general reference to the avashikas can also be found in Tattvarta Sutra, a text that is authoritative both to Shvetambara and to Digambara Jains. So before we go further, the 6 avashikas are: 1, samayika, the cultivation of mental equanimity through contemplation; 2, the Chaturvimshati-stava, a hymn of veneration to the 24 jinas; 3, vandana, the rite of guru veneration; 4, pratikramana, the rite of contemplative introspection and repentance; 5, pratyakyana, the rite of vowing to not act improperly in the future; and 6, kayotsarga, body renouncing meditation. So although the emphasis of these 6 practices is often depicted as centering around the practice of pratikramana in particular, these 6 practices also illustrate the role that desire, or raga, ideally plays in ascetic daily life. So as these 6 avashikas illustrate, an ascetic must contemplatively renounce certain types of desires that impede spiritual development, while effectively cultivating others that enable spiritual progression. So the 2 avashikas that best highlight this juxtaposition of desires, and which I will therefore predominantly focus my attention on today, are the first and second, samayika and chaturvimshati-stava. So beginning first with samayika, the first avashika, or daily obligation. This is a contemplative practice that aims towards producing an enduring state of mental equanimity that pervades the entirety of one's life beyond its ritualized avashika form. So according to the Avashika Sutra, during the ritualized portion of this practice, which typically occurs for 48 minutes, a person, for instance, recites the following. And let me switch to the slides you can see. So you see on the left here: I perform, sir, the rite of equanimity. I abandon all bad activity for the course of my life, threefold by threefold, in mind, body, and speech. I will not perform, nor cause anybody to perform, nor approve anybody performing any bad action. I repent of it, I censure, reject, and abandon myself. So Vatakera further expounds that an ascetic should stand motionless for the duration of this practice, during which time they should suppress all negative and or passionate mental states, and also cultivate a feeling of neutrality towards all living beings. Such ritualized renunciation of problematic cognitive attachments aims to assist practitioners in effectively transcending the karmic grip of egoistic desires that are associated with those thoughts and behaviors that practically obstruct a jiva from attaining liberation. So the attachments that a practitioner renounces in Samayaka illustrate the range of associated desires that are classified as being intrinsically problematic to a practitioner's effective spiritual development. So in terms of specifying exactly what this range of problematic desires and behaviors are, Kunda Kunda, for instance, writes that one must in particular transcend gladness, hasya, fondness or preference, rati, grief, shoka, dislike, arati, disgust, jugupsa, and fear, bhaya, in order to achieve enduring equanimity. So such depictions of Samayaka illustrate that this practice is primarily geared towards effective cognitive elimination, not cultivation. And so now turning to the Chaturvimshati-stava, the second avashaka, which by contrast emphasizes the oppositional importance that is placed on specific types of cognitive cultivation. So this hymn emphasizes beneficial mental attachments and the efficacious desires that accompany them, culminating in liberation. So through the recitation of this hymn, an ascetic first venerates and then supplicates the jhanas. The hymn uses the third person imperative voice, the polite, may you give, may you bestow, etc., several times, in order to specifically entreat the jhanas to bestow grace, liberation, wisdom, samadhi, and perfection on the practitioner who recites this hymn. So before providing further analysis, I'd like to actually look at this hymn as it is presented in the Avashaka Sutra, one of the two key texts that are studied by Shvetambara ascetics prior to Diksha, full ascetic initiation. So I'd like to call your attention in particular to two sections of the hymn at the beginning and end that emphasize these specific components of veneration and supplication. So first, I will glorify the illuminators of the world, the creators of the Dharma Tirtha, the jhanas, the arhats, the 24, the enlightened ones. And then we get the list of praise to Rishabha and Ajita, etc. So after the list of names, if you move to the bottom bold section, thus I have praised the 24, who have discarded dirt and impurity, in whom old age and death have disappeared, the excellent jhanas. May they, the Tirthankaras, be graceful to me. May they, the supreme siddhas of the world, who have been glorified, venerated, and praised, give liberation and supreme wisdom, and the best, highest samadhi. May the perfected ones, purer than the moons, more radiant than the suns, more profound than the oceans, give me perfection. So as scholars, including John Court and quite recently Anil Mundra, have noted, such hymns present a theological paradox. The jhanas are understood to be entirely desireless and dispassionate. They are vitaraga, meaning without desire. The jhanas therefore remain in a perpetual state of neutrality or samayaka, equanimity, that entails their ongoing eternal non-action. The jhanas therefore remain non-responsive towards practitioners because any positive devotional response that a jhana might offer to one jiva but not to another would demonstrate preference or fondness, rati, one of the previously mentioned forms of attachment. So, and yet, practitioners nevertheless do actively supplicate the jhanas, as is demonstrated in the Chaturvimshati-stava. So it should be noted that the recitation of this hymn has over time been incorporated into the more robust ritual practice known as Chaitya Vandana, or image veneration. So this expanded and highly embodied practice is performed by both ascetic and lay Shvetambara Murti Pujika Jains towards temple images or murtis of the jhanas. So in addition to also incorporating Pratikramana and Kayotsarga, Chaitya Vandana is also modeled on the third avashaka, Vandana, Guru veneration. So relevantly, Chaitya Vandana also emphasizes practitioners venerating and supplicating the jhanas with a sincere devotional attitude and entreating them, for instance, to, quote, be forever beneficent to us. So a practitioner might also recite the obstacle remover hymn as a part of Chaitya Vandana. This hymn both glorifies Parshvanatha and requests that he grant a practitioner, quote, wisdom in birth after birth. So both Court and Mundra have written compelling articles on Jain Bhakti that demonstrate how devotion in Jain tradition both complicates and also reformulates the traditional Indic category of bhakti, which is most generally conceptualized as a relationship between a devotee and a specific form of the divine that is most commonly characterized as being in some fashion reciprocal. So for instance, typically a devotee glorifies the divine and or expresses their sincere love to the divine, and then that deity is often believed to respond in some fashion. So this can take different flavors, but there's some reciprocation. So any potential devotional relationship between a practitioner and a jinna, however, must necessarily be to some degree one-sided in light of the previously mentioned vitaraga status of the jinnas and the fact that they do not, in the conventional bhakti sense, actively reciprocate a practitioner's devotion. So both Court and Mundra's discussion of Jain Bhakti emphasizes that within the Jain context, devotion primarily serves a very important purificatory function, in that a sincere devotional attitude is believed to actively purify a jiva of their existent karma. And this idea of purification can also be seen in the Namokara mantra. And here we're looking at Dr. Miller's translation. So here we see that it is after the act of bowing to or praising these 5 specific classes of higher beings, arhats, siddhas, acharyas, upadhyayas, and sadhus, that all evil, meaning all karma, is effectively destroyed. So both Court and Mundra's work agrees with the point that Jain Bhakti does not center the relationship between a jiva and a jinna as much as it centers the reflexive purificatory function of devotion, which rids a jiva of existing karma and also prevents new karma from accruing. So my argument today intends to take such points just one step further, highlighting that specific typologies of raga are what actually underlie such cultivations and expressions of devotion, veneration, and supplication, and which in fact constitute a necessary ingredient to and typology of contemplative praxis. So as previously discussed, a practitioner both cultivates and expresses their desires for 1, grace, 2, liberation, 3, supreme wisdom, 4, the highest samadhi, and 5, perfection, through the recitation of the hymn that we looked at, the Chaturvimshati-stava. Such desires importantly aim towards those beings and objects that are situated beyond the realm of mundane existence. Desires towards transcendental objects constitute those specific desires that bear this purificatory power and should therefore be actively and contemplatively cultivated. So such transcendent ragas are practically nurtured during one's daily recitation and repetition of such hymns as the Chaturvimshati-stava. The tandem cultivation and expression of such desires are what then form a practitioner's devotional disposition in juxtaposition to those eliminatory contemplative practices, such as samayaka, that aim to cognitively remove the problematic typologies of raga and their associated mental and physical actions, the types that we see on the right. So further evidence of the role of such transcendental typologies of raga can be found in the Mulatara of Vatakera in this particular excerpt that I've chosen today, which I'll read in entirety. So he writes, previous karma is destroyed by bhakti to the excellent jinnas, and vidyas and mantras are successful through the grace of the acharya. Raga for the arhats, in whom raga has disappeared and who are without fault. Raga for the dharma and for the shruta, and raga for the acharyas and shamanas, and the very learned, who are endowed with correct conduct. This is the praiseworthy raga for all who have ragas, for those whose aims are successful through bhakti directed towards jinnas. That bhakti, even though full of raga, is nevertheless not a worldly desire, or nidana. So I've highlighted here the section that I'd like us to focus on. And so such verses and passages, 1, effectively acknowledge raga as being a foundational aspect of contemplative practice, and 2, separate raga into the 2 categories of worldly, nidana, and transcendent, meaning those desires that aim beyond the world. Bhakti, construed here as devotional desire for the jinnas, is specifically named as being the ultimate liberatory typology of desire that, as the first line above shows, both actively destroys karma and also enables other forms of praxis, such as mantra recitation, to actually be effective. So such a passage affirms that while nidana or worldly ragas must be eliminated, a practitioner should actively cultivate transcendental forms of raga. Furthermore, such a practice of cultivating such ragas is in fact integral to one's ongoing contemplative life and also spiritual progression. So moving towards the conclusion of my presentation, I want to close by drawing a quick comparison and noting the way in which such utilization of raga in Jain tradition mirrors the Advaita Vedanta concept of mumuksha, the desire for liberation, as is expounded by the 8th century Shankaracharya. So in his Upadesha Sahasri, or 1,000 teachings, for instance, Shankara specifically mentions mumuksha, the desire for liberation, as being a necessary component of one's praxis. Sadhana, according to Shankara, enables liberation by progressively purifying a practitioner, mentally and physically, to the highest possible degree. So as illustration, Shankara writes that the enlightened mental state that immediately precedes liberation can only occur within a mind that has become, quote, pure like a mirror through the performance of 4 things. 1, yamas, ethical abstentions, 2, niyamas, observances, 3, yajna, sacrifices, and 4, tapas, austerities. So for Shankara, the progressive removal of ignorance and the simultaneous progressive cultivation of correct perception of the highest truth, in this case for Shankara Brahman, through jnana or knowledge, that's going to be the central process of sadhana. So I want to highlight that although Shankara, much like the Jain traditions that I've surveyed today, emphasizes the central importance of austerity and renunciation, Shankara also employs the category of transcendent raga, here called mumuksha, as a unique typology of subtle mental cultivation that is, 1, necessary, 2, purificatory, and 3, is ultimately liberatory. So we have now seen some evidence across Jain and, quite briefly, Vedantic sources that raga can and does play an integral contemplative role in the progression of sadhana towards liberation. So, however, according to both Jain and the brief foray into Vedantic traditions, at the preeminent point of liberation, all ragas, even the transcendental typology, must themselves be wholly transcended in order for a jiva to finally be freed from all typologies of attachment and be liberated. So as a concluding quote, I'd like to reference the way in which Jain philosopher Haribhadra Suri analogizes the jinas to a fire that remains neutral and yet provides the warmth of liberation to worshippers. And so this is an excerpt from a much longer section of several pairs of couplets, but I'll read this excerpt in its entirety. So he writes, even as fire does not become angry or lustful, or call out when people are afflicted with cold, still those who betake themselves to the fire enjoy what they seek. In the same way, people who betake themselves with devotion to the Tirthankaras, who have power over things in the 3 worlds, attain safety, having forsaken the frigidity of existence. That is to say, that even if the jinas do not bestow grace due to being devoid of lust and so on, devotees who make a wish oriented towards those inconceivable wish-fulfilling jewels still consequently acquire the desired fruit by purifying their inner sense. So this quote emphasizes the way in which the fire of devotion, or devotional desire specifically, is what effectively and reflexively to oneself purifies that one who contemplatively cultivates it without any need for potential reciprocation. So I will conclude my remarks there for today, but I do certainly hope that future research will allow me to probe this topic even further. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Hey, wow. Thank you for such a compelling and well-researched presentation, Eileen. That was absolutely brilliant. And it's also very nice that it is a perfect sort of segue piece to our next section. So that was the contemplative practices section. And now we're segueing into the comparative Jain Yoga Studies section. But obviously, Eileen had a great deal of comparative material there as well, too. In particular, Gaudiya Vaishnav, Adi Shankara, Jain, all on this point of raga that really seems to problematize Shramana norms. So that's really nice, Eileen.